it's really amazing to learn about people's backgrounds. So I'm curious, can you share a little bit about your own childhood, the influence your parents and those around you have had on who you have become today?
Well, there are a couple of things. One is I worked really hard. I worked really hard when I was a kid. My parents really instilled that in me. It's like, no matter what you're doing, like if you've made a commitment to it, like you better do a good job. And so, I told my parents when I was very young that I really wanted to learn how to play the piano. And my brother and sister said, yeah, okay, we could kind of get along with that. So they actually bought a piano for us. I took lessons, and then after I started kind of getting bored with the piano after a couple of years, and I didn't really want to practice anymore, my mom would literally come after me and say, like, you made a commitment. You wanted a piano, we got you a piano, you made a commitment to learn how to play this thing, so you better practice. So, it was that kind of sort of reinforcement of, if you make a commitment, you better follow through. And so I think that's one of the things that's kind of stuck with me. The other thing is my parents, like my mom's a clinical pathologist by training. My dad worked in the food services industry for food science actually industry for a long time. But they ended up getting Chinese restaurants later on in their lives. And so I worked at these restaurants as a waitress, as a busboy, like whatever hot jobs need to be done, stocking, inventory. I had to work pretty hard during, high school when everybody else was off, like going to parties and stuff. Like I was working at this restaurant. And so but that taught me the value of hard work. And I was able to make a little bit of money from tips and stuff. And it also taught me the importance of being efficient with your time. And because if you're in a restaurant, you're like, oh, can you, this person wants a glass of water. So you take the person a glass of water, pitcher, fill up their water, come back to your station. Then another person at the same table wants something else, right? Like you figure that out and you make one trip to deal with all three of those things. And so I know that seems kind of a silly example, but it did tell me like the importance of like operational efficiency. I didn't know the term back then, but it really did teach me that. And so, yeah, anyway, those are just some random thoughts from my childhood.
Those are such important lessons because it taught you responsibility. It taught you accountability at such a young age.
And I also learned how to cook Chinese food.
Lots of side benefits. Where were you born and raised, Lydia?
I was born in Chicago. I was raised throughout the U.S. I lived in Chicago and then California. I came back to Chicago for university, lived in Texas for a while, worked in Louisiana. Like I was kind of lived throughout the South for a long time. And then we moved to Canada back in when did we move? In 1996 is when we moved to Canada. I lived in a very white community. I was the only Asian kid in my class. I was the only non-white person in my class. And I hate to admit it, but there were times when there were pretty racist comments back in the day, all the way in, not just in where I lived in Chicago, but also it was really bad when I moved to California, to be honest. And even still, there were more people of color, right? Like there were people who came from, who had Mexican backgrounds. There were people who were Black. There were people who were, other Asian groups. And it was fairly racist where I grew up, and there were a lot of kids who just thought that was okay. And so I did learn to deal with that from a pretty early age. And what did it do to me? I guess it just made me more sensitive to knowing people have different cultural backgrounds. They have different ways of thinking and looking at situations. And you can't just assume that just because you look at something one way, everybody else sees it the same way. And I did learn that pretty early. Yeah,
and I'm curious if you ever felt like, your race in some ways affected your career or, anything through life at all, or did you let it or not?
I don't think so. There were probably people who assumed things about me because of being Chinese, but I don't know, the other thing too is because I'm North American, right? Like I was born in Chicago, I was raised in the US. My parents were first generation, but I was born in they came over from China, but I like I've been totally immersed in North America my whole life. And so, on the one hand, you know, I was culturally completely assimilated. On the other hand, I always had a piece of me that was like a little bit different. But did it affect my jobs? I don't think it really affected my work. I don't know. Maybe people hired me because of my background, or didn't hire me because of my background. Like, I don't really know, but I don't think so. I don't think so. But I don't know. Maybe I'm being naive.